In addition to all the big races tonight, North Dakota voters also decided on a couple ballot measures. Measure 1 involves setting term limits, preventing state legislators from serving more than 8 years in their legislature or 2 terms as governor. Now, current lawmakers would be grandfathered in. The clock would start January 1st. Let's look at some of the numbers that are in on this race so far. Again, this is not final, but right now, 62% of voters, or almost 63%, are saying yes, they do want term limits. 38%, 37% saying no. About a third of the votes are counted in the state so far. We're not sure which parts of the state they've come from. Measure 2, also on the ballot today, would legalize the production, processing, and sale of cannabis, that are known as legalizing marijuana. Also, the possession and use of various forms of cannabis by individuals age 21 or older, so under 21 would not be allowed. Right now, this is still fairly close. It's getting closer as the nights went on. No was leading big earlier. Right now, it is yes about 43%, no 56% in the idea of legalizing marijuana in North Dakota.
There are also a number of cities in our area with city-specific ballot measures as well. They're all relating to raising their sales tax. In West Fargo, voters have just approved a 0.5% sales tax, 62% to 38%. That's to fund the fire and police departments. That one was a bit controversial. The fire departments say without that funding, they're not meeting the response times they need to keep people safe, though some in the community were outspoken saying that they need to reallocate the funding that they already have. In Moorhead, the same deal was on the table. Sales tax increase 0.5%. This one was specifically to fund the library and community center project. We're still waiting on numbers there, but in Grand Forks, 1/2 cent sales tax increase was on the table, and man, is that race tight right now. It's 49.74% yes to 50.26% no. Waiting on the final results there. Obviously, specifically mentioned in that measure was the jail, the law enforcement center, but it's focused on infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, and we will continue to follow that race.
Very close race there, still early in the night. Coming up, as we wait for more results to roll in, we'll take another look at the voter turnout today, a large one at that.